The mop jabbed painfully into her shoulder, and Rita barely kept her balance, grabbing the edge of the table. The folder of documents she had just picked up from the floor slipped out of her hands and fanned out across the parquet. "Hands off the papers," Scott Adler snarled, looming over her in his expensive suit. "You were hired to mop floors, not to poke around in documents." Look at her, suddenly thinks she's smart. Rita slowly straightened up, looking at him from below. The office fell silent. The secretary, Joanne, froze by the door with a tray of coffee. Two managers by the window stopped whispering. Even the air conditioner seemed to go quiet. Scott smugly glanced around, clearly enjoying the effect he'd made. He loved moments like this when he could show who was in charge, humiliate someone small and defenseless in front of witnesses. "What are you staring at?" He snapped his fingers in front of her face. "Grab your rags and get out of here. And by tonight, this place better be spotless, got it? Otherwise I'll find a replacement real fast." Rita felt something click inside her, the same switch she'd learned to flip back in childhood when survival depended on it. She bent down unhurriedly, gathered the scattered pages, and neatly stacked them. Then, just as calmly, she picked up the top sheet, the contract in Chinese with a parallel translation, and skimmed it. "Scott," she said evenly, "Clause 3 states that the penalty for delays is 15% of the deal amount, but in the original Chinese version it's 5%. That's either a translator's mistake or a deliberate setup. Also, in Clause 6 the delivery dates are mixed up, the month and year are reversed according to the Chinese format, and your lawyer didn't notice. If you sign this today, as you planned, the company will lose about $40 million in penalties alone." The office became so quiet that the noise of the street outside was audible, the sixth floor of a business center in downtown Chicago, the familiar hum of Lake Shore Drive beyond the glass. Scott opened his mouth and closed it. Then opened it again. His face slowly flushed from his neck to his temples, a sure sign that the CEO of the Bow Invest Holding was about to explode. "You? Who do you think you are?" he finally choked out. "A janitor telling me what to do?" "I'll take off your badge," Rita interrupted calmly. She spoke softly, but there was something in her voice that made everyone in the room straighten instinctively. It was the voice of someone used to giving orders. "What?" Scott even took a step back. "Take off your badge," Rita repeated. "You don't work here anymore. I, Rita Richson, am the new owner of Bow Invest. I bought it 2 weeks ago. And for the last 3 days, I've been working here as a cleaner to see how things really are in the company I acquired." She unbuttoned the top of her work coat, and beneath it flashed the edge of a silk blouse, clearly not something worn by a woman holding a mop. The tray slipped from Joanne's hands and crashed to the floor, splashing dark coffee across the light carpet. But no one even turned around. Everyone was looking at Rita. She stood in the middle of the office, still wearing the blue cleaning uniform with the service logo on her chest, but something subtle had changed in her posture, the tilt of her head, the look in her eyes. This was no longer a beaten-down cleaner who could be poked with a mop and insulted in front of everyone. This was the owner. 3 weeks earlier, Rita had been sitting in a notary's office, signing inheritance documents. Outside, a November rain was falling, droplets sliding down the window and blurring the gray outlines of a Chicago day. The notary, an elderly man with a neat beard and attentive eyes behind his glasses, laid out the papers in front of her and patiently explained each point. "So, Rita Richson, according to the will of Joseph Richson, you are the sole heir to all his assets. This includes the Bow Invest Holding, valued at approximately $2 billion, a country house in the suburbs, an apartment in downtown Chicago, as well as personal accounts and an investment portfolio." Rita nodded silently, signing where the notary indicated. Her hands didn't shake. She had learned to control herself. But inside, everything was tightening into a hard knot she couldn't get untangled. Joseph Richson. Her father. A man she had seen only 3 times in her life. The first time was when she was 8, when he came to Springfield for her mother's funeral. He stood by the grave in an expensive black coat, so out of place among the snow-covered crosses and peeling fences of the provincial cemetery. Then he took her to her grandmother, her mother's mother, who lived in a small town in Illinois, and went back to his Chicago, to his big business, to his real life, where there was no room for a daughter from a casual affair. She saw him the second time 15 years later, when he found her in Beijing. By then she had graduated from university, worked as a translator for a large trading company, spoke fluent Chinese and French, lived in a small rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, and expected nothing from anyone. He arrived without warning, rang the doorbell, and stood in the doorway older, thinner, but just as distant in his expensive coat. "I'm sick," he said then. "The doctors say I have a year, maybe a year and a half. I want to leave everything to you. Not because I feel guilty, though I do, but because you're the only person with my blood who achieved something on their own. My official family. They only know how to spend." Rita listened in silence. She didn't forgive him, she couldn't. She didn't drive him away, she didn't want to. She just listened and nodded. Then he left, and they never saw each other again, only spoke on the phone occasionally, briefly, to the point. He talked about business, she listened and remembered. The third time she saw him was in a coffin, at a closed funeral attended only by the closest people. His legal wife, Bree, was there, a well-groomed blonde in her 50s, her face frozen either by Botox or by rage, and two adult sons who looked at Rita with barely concealed hatred. They already knew about the will. "We'll challenge it," Bree hissed when they crossed paths at the cemetery exit. "You won't get anything, you upstart. You think he left us because of you? He didn't even remember you until the doctors gave him a deadline. He just wanted to spite us one last time." Rita said nothing. She turned and walked away under the fine autumn rain, feeling their drilling stares on her back. Let them challenge it, she had good lawyers, and the will was airtight. Her father funny, she had never learned to call him Dad, even in her thoughts had taken care of that. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that she had inherited not just a company, but a tangled mess of problems she would have to sort out. Rita picked up the phone and dialed her lawyer. Reed Rassam was a family friend, more precisely, her father's friend since their university days, one of the few people he trusted. "Rita, good to hear from you," his calm voice came through the line. "How are you?" "Fine." "Reed, I want to understand what's going on in the company. My father said it was a mess, but I need to see it with my own eyes." "I understand. You want to conduct an audit?" "No. They'll clean everything up before I arrive. I want to see how things really work. When no one knows they're being watched." There was a pause on the line. Then Reed chuckled softly. "So you want to go undercover?" "Exactly. Get hired into some invisible position, walk the halls, listen, observe. A couple of weeks at most. Then I'll show up officially." "That could be dangerous," the lawyer said after a moment. "Scott Adler, the man your father left as CEO, is not someone you should play games with. He has connections, influence. And between us, not the cleanest conscience. Joseph planned to get rid of him but didn't have time. All the more reason I need to see what he does when he thinks the owner's eye is far away. It's your right, of course. I can help with the paperwork, I know people in cleaning companies. But please, be careful." Rita smiled into the phone. "I survived on my own in China for 12 years. I'll manage a Chicago office somehow." A week later, she was standing at the entrance of the Sphere Business Center on Lakeshore Drive, dressed in a blue work coat and white soft-soled sneakers. In her hands was a plastic bucket and a set of cleaning supplies. On her chest was a badge with the name Rita and the logo of the cleaning company Clean Home. The security guard glanced at her indifferently and nodded. Cleaners were just another part of the scenery here, like the palm trees in the lobby or the coffee machine by the elevators. Rita walked to the service elevator and pressed the button for the 6th floor. Her first workday in her own company was beginning. The first thing she noticed was fear. It hung in the air like the smell of stale coffee, soaked into the walls, showed in the hurried steps of employees and their lowered eyes. People here were afraid quietly, habitually, hopelessly. Afraid of being late, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of catching management's eye at the wrong moment. Rita washed floors, wiped glass, took out the trash and watched. Listened. Remembered. On the second day, she met Rose, an elderly cleaner who had worked there for 15 years. "You knew?" Rose asked, looking Rita up and down. "Young, pretty. How did you end up scrubbing floors?" Rita shrugged. "Work is work. Right now, I just need to make money." Well, Rose shook her head. "Just be careful here. Especially with management. That Adler, the CEO, he's a beast, not a man. If something's not to his liking, he'll chew you up without blinking. The last girl, Sylvia, got fired because she dropped a flower in his office. Broke the pot by accident, and he made such a scene people thought the walls would collapse. And Sylvia, by the way, is a single mom with 2 kids to feed. Rita listened and remembered. In the evening, back in her rented apartment, she had deliberately chosen a simple 1-bedroom on the outskirts to fully fit the role. She took out a notebook and wrote down everything she had seen and heard that day. On the 3rd day, she accidentally became a witness to a conversation in a meeting room. She was mopping the hallway when voices drifted through a door left slightly open. "There must be no audit," Scott was saying. "That heiress doesn't understand business anyway. Some translator from China. She'll sit around for 6 months, won't figure anything out, and then sell the company back to us cheap." "And if she doesn't sell?" A younger voice, nervous and fussy. "She will," Adler replied confidently. "Or we'll convince her. I have my own methods of persuasion. The main thing now is to close the contract with the Chinese before she shows up. The commissions are so big there'll be enough for everyone." Rita stood in the hallway, gripping the mop, feeling a cold fury boiling inside her. So that was how it was. Her own CEO was planning to deceive her, rob her, and maybe worse. And the Chinese contract she had seen on the accounting desk was part of that plan. The translation errors she would later point out in the office were no mistakes, they were a setup. If the company signed the contract under the wrong terms, the losses would fall on her as the new owner. Adler and his accomplices would take their commissions and disappear, leaving her with multimillion-dollar debts. "Hey, why are you just standing there?" Rita flinched and turned around. A young man in an expensive suit stepped out of the meeting room, the same one with the nervous voice. "You don't belong here. Go clean a hallway on another floor." "Why, yes, sorry," she put on a frightened smile and hurried away, rattling her bucket. "I'm leaving." But as she walked off, she caught a glimpse of his badge. Deborah McLean, Chief Financial Officer. On the 4th day, Rita found an ally, or rather, he found her. She was wiping a windowsill in the reception area when a short, slightly overweight man in his 40s passed by, with a kind face and messy hair. He stopped, looked at her closely, and suddenly asked, "Excuse me, do you happen to know where I can find some decent tea? The machine spits out some kind of sludge, and coffee is already giving me heartburn." Rita looked up in surprise. He was the first person in 3 days to speak to her like a human being, not a piece of furniture. "There's a kettle and a box of tea in the break room on the 3rd floor," she said. "It's usually empty until lunchtime." "Oh, thank you," he said, genuinely pleased. "I'm Edgar, IT department, 4th floor. If you need anything, feel free to ask." He smiled awkwardly and hurried toward the elevator. Rita watched him go. IT. If anyone knew all the secrets of this place, it was the people from IT. 2 days later, she ran into him by chance in that same break room where she had come to have some tea before the morning cleaning. Edgar was sitting at a small table, buried in his laptop, typing quickly. "Hi," Rita said, filling the kettle with water. "How's the tea?" "Oh, it's you." He looked up from the screen and smiled. "The tea is great, thanks for the tip. The only decent place in this wasp nest." "Wasp nest?" She sat down across from him. "Yeah. Haven't you noticed? Everyone here hates each other, fears each other, and tries to stab each other in the back. Management are tyrants, middle management are opportunists, and the lower-level employees just survive however they can. I've worked here 8 years, I've seen it all." Rita nodded sympathetically. "So why don't you leave, if it's that bad?" Edgar sighed. "And go where? I'm too old to start from scratch. Mortgage, wife, 2 kids. I cling to this job with my teeth, even though it makes me sick every day. Just yesterday, Adler ordered me to delete all system emails from the last year related to Project Orient. Know why?" Rita felt her heart start beating faster. Project Orient, that was the Chinese contract. "Why?" she asked, keeping her voice as neutral as possible. "Because emails leave traces. Traces of how those contracts were cooked up, who got what commissions, where the money went. The new owner is about to show up, and they need to cover their tracks." Edgar shook his head. I deleted them, of course. What choice did I have? Refuse and I'm fired. But I kept a copy. Just in case. Rita stirred sugar into her cup in silence for a long moment. Then she looked up and met Edgar's eyes. Edgar, if you had a chance to stop all this, would you take it? He froze with his cup halfway to his mouth. What do you mean? I mean that sometimes people aren't who they seem to be. And sometimes a mop is just a cover. Their eyes locked. Edgar slowly set his cup down on the table. You. He swallowed hard. You're the heiress? Richson? Rita pressed a finger to her lips. Quiet. For now, only you know. And I really hope it stays between us for the time being. My God. Edgar leaned back in his chair. Well, that's a twist. I thought you were just, well, a pretty cleaner. And your wait, so you've been watching them this whole time? I've been gathering information. And now I need your help, Edgar. Those emails you saved, I'll need them. And anything else you have. I promise, when this is over, you won't regret helping me. Edgar stared out the window for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. You know, my grandfather always said an honest person has nothing to fear. I've wanted to do something for a long time, I just didn't know how. If you're giving me a chance, I'm with you. They exchanged phone numbers and agreed to stay in touch. Rita went back to her mop, feeling a strange mix of relief and anxiety. She had an ally now. But the risk of being exposed had grown. The fifth day began with a small but unpleasant encounter. In the elevator, she ran into Bree, her father's legal widow. Bree had come to the office on some business of her own, probably squeezing out another payment from the company that no longer belonged to her. Bree's gaze slid over Rita's work coat, the bucket, the mop, and she recoiled toward the elevator wall with disgust. Ugh, it reeks of chemicals, she said loudly to the empty space, though there was no one else in the cabin. Rita silently watched the numbers above the door. 3rd floor. 4th. They've gotten completely shameless these days, Bree continued, clearly enjoying herself. Back in my day, servants at least knew their place. Now they crowd into elevators with respectable people, stinking up everything with their buckets. 5th floor. The doors opened, and Bree stepped out, leaving behind a thick cloud of cloying perfume. Rita allowed herself the faintest smile. She wondered what expression that woman's face would wear in a few days when she learned who the smelly cleaner in the elevator really was. Then again, gloating wasn't her style. Rita had learned long ago not to waste energy on people who didn't deserve it. On the 6th day, something happened that Rita would later think of as the point of no return. She was mopping the floor in the administrative hallway when a woman's scream came from the CFO's office. I won't sign this. The voice was young, breaking. This is fraud. This is a criminal offense. You will, a man's voice replied calmly. Or tomorrow you're out of here with a ruined reputation. And everyone will find out how you bought your diploma 3 years ago. Do you think your husband will be happy to hear about that? Rita froze by the door. Through the gap, she could see part of the office. Deborah McLean, the same nervous-voiced CFO, was sitting behind the desk. In front of him stood a young woman, thin, fair-haired, in a strict office suit. Her face was white as paper. Sign it, Amber, McLean said gently. It's just a tax report. A small adjustment of numbers, and everyone's happy. You don't want problems, do you? The woman Amber took the pen with a trembling hand. Rita saw a tear roll down her cheek. And in that moment, something inside Rita snapped. She pushed the door open and walked into the office. Sorry, I need to mop the floor here, she said loudly, rattling her bucket. McLean turned on her, irritated. Are you blind? Get out immediately and wait until we're finished. Of course, Rita put on a flustered, obedient act. But oops, the folder fell. She deliberately knocked a stack of documents off the edge of the desk with her elbow, and the papers scattered across the floor. McLean jumped up, swearing. Amber stepped back, and in the chaos Rita managed to whisper in her ear, Don't sign. Find me in the break room on the 3rd floor at lunch. Amber stared at her in shock, but Rita was already on the floor, gathering papers and mumbling apologies. A minute later, she was shoved out of the office, and she heard McLean yelling about stupid cleaners and how they should fire them all and hire new ones. At lunch, Amber came to the break room. She sat down across from Rita, nervously crushing a napkin in her hands, and stayed silent for a long time. "Who are you?" she finally asked. "Someone who can help," Rita replied. "But for that, I need to know everything. What are they making you sign?" Amber, who turned out to be a senior accountant, told her everything. How management had been forcing her to falsify reports for 6 months. How money was being funneled to shell companies. How she was scared and silent because she had a small child and a sick mother depending on her. "I have no choice," she said, wiping away tears. "If I refuse, they'll fire me and ruin me. If I agree, I become an accomplice. Either way, my life is over." Rita covered her hand with her own. "Amber, listen to me. There's always a choice. I can't explain everything right now, but trust me, things are about to change in this company. Very soon. Don't sign anything. Stall, make excuses. Can you hold on for a few more days?" Amber looked at her with distrust mixed with a fragile hope. "Who are you? Why do you care?" "Because I've been in a similar situation myself. And because I know this loneliness is the most powerful weapon used against us. But you're not alone anymore." After that conversation, Rita called Reed. "I need to speed things up. I'm revealing myself tomorrow." "Did something happen?" "They're pressuring people. Forcing them to sign fake documents. If I wait another week, someone will break in, then we'll never find who's really responsible." The lawyer was silent for a moment. "All right. I'll prepare the documents to fire Adler and McLean. You'll need security. Do you have someone you trust?" "The head of building security, Dwayne. He worked with my father since the early 90s. My father said he was the only honest man within a mile of the office. Contact him. I'll be at the office tomorrow at 10. Be prepared, it's going to get intense." Rita smiled to herself. "I was born in Springfield, Reed. I can handle the heat." 7th day. The morning started like any other. She came in at 8, changed in the supply room, grabbed her bucket and mop. Rose, as always, grumbled about the weather and how young people didn't want to work anymore. "You're weird today," Rose said, studying Rita. "Like you're glowing from the inside. Fall in love or something?" "Something like that," Rita smiled. "Rose, you were working until lunch today, right?" "Yeah." "Why?" "Nothing. Just stay a little longer if you can. Might get interesting." The old woman gave her a suspicious look but didn't say a word. At 9:30, Rita went up to the 6th floor and started mopping the hallway outside Adler's office. She worked slowly on purpose, stretching the time. At 9:45, the office door flew open and Adler stormed out red-faced, rumpled, clearly in a foul mood. McLean hurried after him. "And I want that contract signed by lunch," the CEO growled. "I don't care that the translator is sick. Find another one, or translate it yourself. The Chinese are flying in tomorrow if we're not ready." He cut himself off when he saw Rita. "You're still here? I told you to get off this floor when I'm working. Always underfoot." "Sorry, Scott Adler," she dipped her head. "I'm almost done." She turned to leave and accidentally clipped the stack of documents McLean was carrying with her mop. Papers scattered across the floor. "Can't you keep your hands to yourself?" the CFO shrieked. Adler, clearly irritated by the delay, yanked the mop out of her hands and jabbed Rita in the shoulder. "Hands off the papers." That was when time slowed down. Rita stood in the middle of the hallway, feeling the dull ache in her shoulder, staring at the man who had just hit her. Not hard but deliberately, in front of witnesses, to humiliate her, crush her, prove his power. People peeked out into the hallway, the secretary Joanne, 2 managers, someone from accounting. Everyone watched in silence. Rita bent down slowly and gathered the documents. It was the same contract in Chinese with the parallel translation. 3 days ago she had seen it in accounting and immediately noticed the mismatch. Now it was in her hands, and the moment was perfect. "Scott Adler," she said evenly. "In Clause 3, The contract states the penalty for delays is 15% of the deal amount. But in the original Chinese version, it's 5%. She spoke quietly, but every word dropped into the hallway silence like a stone into water. That's either a translator's mistake or a deliberate setup. Also, in Clause 6 the delivery dates are mixed up, the month and year are reversed in the Chinese format, and your lawyer didn't notice. If you sign this today like you planned, the company will lose about $40 million in penalties alone. Adler stared at her as if the mop in his hand had suddenly started speaking Chinese, which, honestly, wasn't far off. You? Who do you think you are? Rita straightened. She felt everyone's eyes on her, shocked, frightened, disbelieving. Somewhere behind her she heard familiar footsteps. Dwayne, head of security, had come up with 2 of his men. And Reed, she spotted him by the elevator. Everything was in place. Take off your badge, she said. You don't work here anymore. Adler's face turned a deep, ugly red. Have you lost your mind? Security. Get this crazy woman out of here. Security is already here, Dwayne said calmly, stepping forward. And I have orders from Rita Richson, the new owner of Bow Invest. Here are the ownership documents and your termination notice, Scott. Please hand over your access pass and your office keys. The hallway went dead silent. Rita watched the meaning slowly sink into Adler's face. His expression went through every stage from disbelief, to rage, to animal fear. This is impossible, he rasped. She's a cleaner. She was a cleaner, Rita corrected. For the last 7 days. Very useful experience, highly recommended. You learn a lot about how your company actually works. She unbuttoned her work coat and took it off, revealing the silk blouse and tailored pants she'd been wearing underneath the whole time. From her waistband she pulled out a folder of documents, copies of emails Edgar had given her, and the notes she'd been keeping all week. I have evidence of more than $150 million stolen over the past 2 years. Fake contracts, shell contractors, manipulated reports. It's all documented and has been submitted to the proper authorities. So if I were you, I wouldn't be thinking about how to intimidate me. I'd be thinking about how to find a very good lawyer. Adler swayed and grabbed the wall. McLean, standing beside him, made a strangled sound and tried to quietly back toward the stairs, but one of the guards blocked his way. This applies to you too, Deborah McLean, Rita said. Especially considering your conversation with Amber yesterday. Blackmail is a criminal charge, in case you forgot. McLean turned pale as chalk. After that, everything moved fast. Security escorted Adler and McLean into a conference room where lawyers were waiting with termination papers. Reed took over coordination, contacted the police, handed over the collected materials, and arranged for the offices to be sealed. Rita stayed in the hallway, surrounded by employees who looked at her with stunned disbelief and shy hope. Amber was the first to step forward, the same accountant from earlier. Her eyes were shining with tears. Is it really you? The cleaner who dash it is, Rita smiled. I told you things would change soon. Thank you, Amber whispered. Thank you. I didn't know what to do anymore. Now you do. Do your job honestly, and you'll be fine. Then Rose approached the cleaner who had shared that little supply room with her all week. The old woman stared at her like she was seeing a ghost. Lord have mercy, she managed. Well, I'll be damned. Now I get it. I kept thinking, this girl's not simple educated, clearly, and here she is scrubbing floors. I figured you ran away from your husband or something. And look at you. Rita laughed, really laughed for the first time all week, from the heart. Rose, you helped me a lot. Seriously. If it weren't for your stories, I wouldn't have known half of it. Oh, come on, Rose said, embarrassed. I was just running my mouth like always. Exactly. Sometimes talking is the most useful thing there is. Rita lowered her voice. By the way, you said Sylvia, the one who got fired over the broken flower pot, is a single mom with 2 kids. Do you have her number? Yeah, we talk sometimes. Please call her. Tell her job is waiting. And I'll pay her for all the time she was out of work. Rose blinked. You mean? Seriously? Absolutely. There's a lot that needs fixing here. We'll start small. By noon, the office was buzzing like a disturbed hive. The news spread across all floors. The cleaner turned out to be the owner, the CEO and CFO were fired, there might even be criminal charges. People gathered in small groups, whispering, looking at Rita with a mix of curiosity and fear. Rita was sitting in Adler's former office, now her, sorting through paperwork. Her head buzzed from the overload of information, but she didn't let herself relax. This was only the first victory. A lot of work still lay ahead. There was a knock on the door. "Come in." It was Edgar. He shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, clearly unsure how to behave now. "Rita Richson, I just wanted to say, well, that I'm glad things turned out this way. And if you need anything from IT, we're ready." Rita stood up and walked over to him. "Edgar, none of this would have worked without you. Those emails you saved became key evidence. You risked your job and your reputation to help me. I won't forget that." Edgar blushed. "Oh, come on. You did everything yourself. I was just on the side. You were the only person in this company who treated me like a human being. Not because you knew who I was, but because that's who you are. That matters." She paused, then added, "I need a new IT director. Someone I can trust. Would you take the job?" Edgar opened his mouth, closed it. Then opened it again. I don't know if I can handle it." "You can. I'm sure of it." He looked at her for a few seconds, then broke into a wide smile. "You know what? My grandfather was right. An honest person really has nothing to fear. I'm in." That evening, when the office was empty and the lights of nighttime Chicago glowed outside the windows, Rita stayed alone in her office. On the desk in front of her stood a framed photo, the only thing she had brought with her from Beijing. A woman with tired, kind eyes, and a little girl with braids pressed against her. Her mother and Rita herself, 8 years old. The last photo before everything collapsed. "See, Mom," she said softly. "I made it. On my own." Chicago roared outside the window, a huge city that was now her home. Tomorrow would bring a new day, and there would be more work than she could imagine. A new CEO to find, a full audit to conduct, employees' trust to rebuild, relationships with partners to repair. But right now, in this moment, she allowed herself to just sit in silence and feel. The first weeks after the exposure were like a storm. When Bree found out what had happened, she rushed into the office with lawyers and caused a scene in the reception area. "You think you'll get away with this?" she screamed, turning red with rage. "You're nobody. A stray girl my husband took in out of pity. You stole our inheritance." Rita came out to face her, calm and composed. Employees gathered around, some out of curiosity, others to support the new owner. "Bree," Rita said evenly, "Joseph's will was drawn up properly and notarized. You received your share in apartment, a country house, and a substantial sum of money. If you want to challenge the documents, you are welcome to go to court. But you have nothing to do here." "How dare you?" Bree shouted. "I'm the widow of this company's founder. You're the former wife of a man who left you 10 years ago. And who left the company to me because he knew you and your sons would ruin it within a year." Bree choked with fury. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I do. And I'm not afraid." Security escorted the unwanted guests out. Rita returned to her office, feeling a slight tremble in her knees. The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion behind. But she didn't let herself relax. Not now. The following months blended into one endless marathon. Rita worked 14 hours a day, sometimes falling asleep right on the couch in her office. She met with partners, renegotiated contracts, fired Adler's people and hired new ones, people she could trust. Gradually, the company began to come back to life. Employees who used to walk around with lowered heads and flinch at management started smiling, discussing ideas, arguing in meetings. Rose, who stayed on as a cleaner, now greeted Rita like an old acquaintance and regularly brought her homemade pies. "You're driving yourself into the ground, girl," she grumbled, setting a bag on the desk. "You'll dry up like a stick. You need a good man to look after you." Rita waved her off. "No time, Rose. maybe later. Someday. Later, the old woman muttered. That's how everyone puts it off. Then bam, and it's all gone. You've only got one life, sweetheart. For some reason, those words stuck with Rita and resurfaced later at the most unexpected moments. Spring arrived quietly. One day she realized the view outside wasn't gray gloom anymore but blue sky with fluffy clouds, and the trees in the square across the street were covered in fresh green leaves. Rita caught herself standing by the window, simply watching the burst of color, forgetting about the report waiting on her desk. Life was settling down. The criminal case against Adler and McLean was slowly moving toward court. The prosecutor's office had gathered enough evidence to charge them with fraud and embezzlement. Bree tried to contest the will but lost in the first instance and was now, according to rumors, looking for ways to negotiate quietly. The company showed steady growth. The Chinese partners, the same ones whose contract had nearly collapsed, became regular clients. Rita personally led the negotiations, and her fluent Mandarin never failed to impress. You are a remarkable woman, Ms. Richson, Mr. Zhang, head of the Chinese delegation, once told her. You combine strength and flexibility in a way we deeply respect. Bamboo in a storm it bends, but it doesn't break. Rita smiled. Life has taught me a lot, Mr. Zhang. Most of all that you must never give up. But life is unpredictable, and just when it seems everything has finally fallen into place, it throws in another surprise. At the end of April, on an ordinary workday, the secretary told Rita she had a visitor. He says it's a personal matter. Last name Richson. Rita tensed. Richson? Someone from her father's family. The stepson she had only seen at the funeral. Send him in. The door opened, and a young man in his early 30s appeared in the doorway, tall, dark-haired, with sharp features and attentive gray eyes. There was something vaguely familiar about him, but Rita couldn't place it. Hello, he said, stepping into the office. I'm Wyatt. Wyatt Richson. You're, I guess, half-brother. Rita slowly stood up from her desk. Half-brother? My father had 2 sons with Bree, Paul and Oliver. Which one are you? Neither. I'm from a third relationship. Actually, an affair Bree didn't even know about. My mother, Margot, was my father's secretary in the early 90s. When she got pregnant, he paid her off and asked her to disappear. She moved to Boston and raised me alone. I only learned the truth after my father died, when my mom finally decided to tell me. Rita sank back into her chair. Another child from a casual affair. Another victim of her father's irresponsibility. How many were there? Why did you come? She asked. Not for money, if that's what you're thinking. He gave a small smile. My mom already explained the situation with the will. I have no rights to the inheritance, and I'm not going to claim any. Then why? Wyatt paused, looking out the window. I wanted to see you. To know what kind of person you are. I heard the story about the cleaner and the Chinese contract. It's already a legend in certain circles. And I thought, maybe I finally have a relative I don't have to be ashamed of. Rita studied him for a long moment, trying to figure out whether he was sincere or playing some game. But there was no cunning or calculation in his eyes, only fatigue and a faint hint of hope. Tell me about yourself, she said at last. Who are you? What do you do? What do you want from life? And he told her. Wyatt turned out to be a civil engineer, working at a small design firm in Boston. He was married, raising a 2-year-old daughter. His life was ordinary, not rich, but decent. I don't want anything from you, he repeated at the end. It's just, when you grow up thinking you're alone, and then suddenly find out there's someone else out there with your blood, you at least want to meet them. To understand who that person really is. Rita nodded. She understood. More than he knew. Come to dinner tomorrow, she said. I'll introduce you to someone. Turns out, there are more than just the 2 of us now. The person she meant was Edgar, her IT director and friend. Over the past months, he had become something like the older brother she never had. They often had dinner together after work, talking about business and about life. Edgar told her about his kids, his wife, the mortgage he had finally paid off thanks to the promotion. Rita listened and slowly thawed, learning what normal human friendship felt like. Another brother? Edgar said in disbelief when she told him about Wyatt. Looks like your dad ran a whole harem. Seems that way, Rita said with a crooked smile. He knew how to produce heirs. Just didn't know how to raise them. Are you angry at him? She thought about it. I don't know. I probably was before. When I was little and couldn't understand why Dad left and never came back. Then I was angry when I grew up and realized he had simply thrown me out of his life like something unnecessary. And now? Now I just accept it. He was who he was. A flawed man with plenty of shortcomings. But in the end, he tried to fix at least something. He left me the company, told me the truth, gave me a chance. It's not redemption, but it's something. Dinner with Wyatt turned out to be surprisingly easy. They sat in a small restaurant near the office. Rita, Edgar, Wyatt, and Wyatt's wife, Natalie, who had come with him. Their little daughter, Emma, was staying with her grandmother. To a new family, Edgar said, raising his glass. Strange, unexpected, but real. Rita clinked glasses with the brother she had met only a week ago and thought that life really was an amazing thing. A year ago, she had been alone, a translator from Beijing, with no family, no roots, no connections. And now she had a company, friends, a brother. All that was missing was... What are you thinking about? Edgar asked quietly. Oh, nothing. Rose says I need a man. Someone to keep an eye on me. Edgar snorted. Rose is a wise woman. And sure, maybe a man wouldn't hurt. But you don't need one to survive. You handle everything on your own. That's your superpower. And what's yours? Mine? He thought for a moment. Probably the ability to make tea in any situation. Even when there's chaos and apocalypse all around, I'll find a kettle and brew proper tea. Rita laughed. That was Edgar in a nutshell, simple, reliable, with his small joys and unbreakable optimism. The summer was hot both literally and figuratively. Adler's trial began in June, and Rita testified as the key witness for the prosecution. The former director's lawyers tried to discredit her testimony, hinted at personal revenge, picked at every word. But she stood her ground, answering calmly and confidently. Do you realize that your actions going undercover in the company under false pretenses could be considered an abuse of authority? The defense attorney asked sarcastically. I worked in my own company, Rita replied. In a position that required no special qualifications. Under my own name, Rita. I stole nothing, falsified nothing, violated nothing. I simply observed how the CEO I had entrusted with management was systematically stealing from me and the company. Adler, sitting at the defendant's table, stared at her with hatred. He had changed a lot over those months, lost weight, grown hollow, lost all his former confidence. Beside him sat McLean, looking like a frightened mouse. In August, the verdict was delivered. Adler was sentenced to 6 years in prison. McLean received a 4-year suspended sentence. When Rita walked out of the courthouse, she was met by a crowd of journalists with cameras and microphones. Rita, how do you feel? Rita, what are your emotions after this victory? Rita she stopped on the steps and raised her hand. I feel relief, she said. But this isn't a victory over a person. It's a victory of justice. Adler and McLean stole not only from me, they stole from the company's employees, its partners, and the state. They created an atmosphere of fear and lies where honest people couldn't work properly. Now it's over. I hope their example becomes a lesson to others. She walked down the steps and got into the car waiting by the curb. Dwayne, the head of security who had become her personal driver after everything that happened, was behind the wheel. Home, Rita? He asked. She thought for a moment. No. To the country house. I want to be alone. The country house, the one she had inherited from her father along with everything else, stood in a pine forest outside Chicago. A large wooden house with a terrace, an apple orchard, a small pond with water lilies. Rita didn't come here often, there was never time. But now she felt a sharp need for silence and peace. She sent Dwayne away, went inside, and sat on the terrace for a long time, watching the sun sink behind the tops of the pines. The air smelled of needles and sun-warmed earth. Somewhere a bird was singing brightly, joyfully, as if it had no idea that courts, prisons, and human cruelty even existed. Well, that's it, Rita said out loud. I did it. She thought she would feel triumph, euphoria, at least satisfaction. Instead, a strange emptiness washed over her like after a long race, when you cross the finish line and suddenly realize you don't know where to run next. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Wyatt. Emma said her first word today. Guess which one? And a photo of a smiling toddler with porridge smeared all over her face. Rita smiled. Mom, she typed. No. Give. A little businesswoman already, came the reply. When are you coming to visit? Natalie misses you. Rita looked at the screen and suddenly understood what was missing. Not a man, like Rose kept saying. Not success, she had enough of that. Not money, power, or recognition. What she lacked was this simple human warmth. Family. People who cared how she was doing, who sent photos of their kids and invited her over. People she wanted to live for. This weekend, she wrote. I'll come with gifts. Tell Emma Aunt Rita is bringing her a teddy bear. Autumn brought new worries and new joys. The company kept growing, with new projects and new partners. Rita slowly learned to delegate, to trust people, and not try to control every little detail. It was hard. Years of survival had taught her to rely only on herself. But Edgar, now her right hand, patiently explained. You can't do everything alone. A company is a team. Your job isn't to control everything, it's to create conditions where people want to work well. Gradually, Rita began to understand what he meant. She introduced a bonus system for initiative, opened a corporate daycare for employees, organized professional training courses. People responded, offered ideas, argued in meetings, took responsibility. The company stopped being a machine driven by fear of management and became a living organism where everyone felt valued. In October, something happened that Rita neither expected nor was ready for. She was returning from a restaurant after a business meeting when she noticed someone following her. A black car without plates appeared in her rearview mirror on a main street and didn't fall back, even when Rita deliberately turned onto side streets. Dwayne, she said to the driver, keeping her voice calm, I think we're being followed. He nodded. He had noticed already. I see it. Don't worry, Rita Richson. We'll lose them. He turned sharply into an alley, then another, then merged onto a wide avenue and blended into traffic. The black car fell back, either lost them or decided not to draw attention. Who could that have been? Rita asked when they finally pulled up to her building. I don't know, Dwayne frowned. But I don't like it. I'll increase security and put people by your entrance. Rita nodded. She tried not to think about who might be behind the surveillance. Bree, still unable to accept her loss? Adler's associates, looking for revenge? Or just a coincidence? The next day, Reed called her. Rita Richson, I have worrying news. Bree hired a private detective to dig into you. So far they haven't found anything serious, but be careful. That woman won't stop. I know, Rita replied. But I have nothing to hide. Let them dig, they'll only find that I've worked honestly my whole life. That's good. Still, don't let your guard down. Rita hung up and thought about it. She understood Bree wouldn't give up, too much was at stake. But what could she do? The will couldn't be challenged, the company operated legally, all taxes were paid. Maybe she would try to find some dirt? A dark secret from the past? Rita smirked. Her past had been hard, but clean. She worked as a translator for an honest company, lived modestly, had no debts and no enemies. The only thing one could accuse her of was loneliness. And loneliness wasn't a crime. November was cold and windy. Rita stayed late at work more and more often, not because she had to, but because her empty apartment felt too quiet. She knew it wasn't healthy, that she needed to change something, find hobbies, meet people, but she didn't know where to start. You're going to burn out, Edgar told her when he found her in the office at 9 in the evening. I'm serious. This can't go on. Do you even have a hobby? Rita shrugged. I used to like drawing. Back when I was a kid. Then draw. Buy paints, canvases, whatever you need and draw. At least on weekends. She waved it off, but the word stuck. And that very weekend, without quite knowing why, she walked into an art store and bought a watercolor set and a sketchbook. The first painting was crooked and awkward. She tried to paint the view from her window and ended up with something that looked like a child's drawing. But the process pulled her in, the feeling of the brush gliding over paper, how an image slowly emerged from the chaos of colors. She painted all day, forgetting about time, work, and worries. And in the evening, looking at her clumsy pictures, she felt alive for the first time in a long while. Not a CEO, not an heiress, not a woman with a mop, but simply Rita. A person with dreams and feelings. December came with the first snow and an unexpected call. Rita was sitting in her office when the secretary said a man wanted to see her. He says he knows you from Beijing. Last name Ren. Rita froze. Ren. Lu Ren. A man she had known 12 years ago in another life, another country, another version of herself. Send him in. He had hardly changed, still tall and slim, with attentive dark eyes and a shy smile. Only a touch of gray at his temples and fine lines around his eyes gave away the years. Rita, he said in Chinese, I'm glad to see you. Lu. She stood up, unsure how to act. What brings you here? I'm in Chicago on business. I heard your story about the cleaner and the contract and decided to stop by. If you don't mind. Of course she didn't mind. They sat across from each other, and Rita felt time fold in on itself, as if those 12 years hadn't really existed, just a pause between meetings. How are you? He asked. Good, she smiled. Unexpectedly good. And you? He shrugged. Working. Living. I got divorced 2 years ago. It didn't work out. No kids. Sometimes I think I was wrong not to stay with you back then. Rita looked at him in silence. 12 years ago they had been together, not for long, just a few months, but it was bright and intense. Then he got an offer to work in Shanghai, and she refused to follow him, and they split up. No scandals. No bitterness. They simply let go, like people do when they love each other but aren't willing to sacrifice their whole lives for that love. Don't regret what happened, she said. We made the right decision back then. Both of us. You really think so? I know it. If I'd gone with you, I wouldn't be who I am now. And you wouldn't be you. Sooner or later we would have hated each other for everything we had to give up. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Maybe you're right. You were always smarter than me. Not smarter. Just more stubborn. They talked until evening about life, work, everything and nothing. It felt strange and good at the same time. To meet someone from your past and realize the past didn't disappear, didn't get erased, it just became part of who you are now. You didn't come here for nothing, Rita said when they were saying goodbye at the office entrance. Did something happen? Lu paused, watching the snow fall. I wanted to apologize. For leaving back then. For not fighting for us. I know it's stupid, so many years have passed, but I needed to say it. There's nothing to forgive, she said, lightly touching his hand. We both did what we had to do. And look where it brought us. You're a successful businessman, and I'm a successful businesswoman too. She laughed. Who would have thought? He smiled. A woman with a mop who reads Chinese contracts. You always knew how to surprise people. They exchanged business cards and promised to stay in touch. Rita watched him get into a taxi and drive away, thinking about the strange turns life takes. A man from the past showed up just to ask forgiveness for something that no longer hurt. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe it was time to finally let it all go. Resentment, regret, fear. She spent Christmas in Boston with Wyatt and Natalie. Little Emma, now 2.5, raced around the apartment, clapping her hands and demanding attention. The Christmas tree glittered with lights, the table was loaded with enough food to feed an army, and outside, snow poured down, wrapping the city in a white blanket. To family, Wyatt said, raising his glass. To the kind we choose for ourselves. Rita clinked glasses with her brother, with Natalie, even with Emma, who solemnly held up her little cup of juice. To family, Rita repeated. And for the first time in many years, that word didn't feel empty. Spring came early. By the end of February, the snow in Chicago was already melting, and the first puddles appeared on the streets. Rita walked to work. Lately she had grown to love those morning walks, when she could stop thinking about business and simply watch the city wake up. The Sphere Business Center rose above Lakeshore Drive, its glass sides shining in the morning sun. Rita paused at the entrance, greeted the security guard out of habit, and stepped into the lobby. Everything was the same: palm planters, a coffee machine, the busy hum of voices. And yet something had changed. Or rather, she had. A year ago, she had stood in this same place in a blue work coat, with a bucket and a mop. No one knew who she was. No one expected that quiet cleaner to turn everything upside down. And now? Now she greeted employees, and they smiled back. Not because they were afraid, but because they respected her. Because she had earned that respect not with money or power, but with actions. "Rita Richson," a familiar voice called out. She turned. Rose was walking toward her across the lobby, still in the same blue coat, but with a new expression, cheerful and a little conspiratorial. "Rose, good morning. Is something wrong?" "Oh, nothing special," the old woman said with a sly smile. "Just wanted to say thank you. For Sylvia, for the daycare, for everything. And also, you've got a visitor. Sitting in reception. Handsome, young. Says it's personal." Rita tensed. "Another relative from the past? Who is it?" "How would I know?" "You'll figure it out." Rose winked and shuffled toward the elevator, her bucket clanking. Rita shook her head and went up to the 6th floor. In reception, a man really was sitting there, about 35, in a good coat, holding a bouquet of white roses. When she walked in, he jumped up and awkwardly held the flowers out to her. "Rita? Hello. My name is Kurt. He stumbled, blushed, took a breath, and blurted, "I read about you in the papers. I saw your interview on TV. And I thought you were an amazing person. And I wanted to invite you to dinner. If you don't mind." Rita looked at him and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. A stranger with roses who read about her in the news and decided to ask her out like something out of a romantic comedy. "Kurt," she said at last, "I'm flattered." "Really? But I don't know you. And I don't usually go to dinner with strangers." "Yes, of course, I understand," he said, deflating. "That was stupid. I'm sorry for bothering you. It's just, when I saw you on TV, talking about justice and about how you have to fight, I thought I'd like to know someone like that. In person. Not as a news celebrity, but as just a person." He turned to leave. Rita watched his slumped back, the bouquet still in his hands, the awkward walk of someone who had just been rejected, and suddenly something inside her softened. "Wait," she said. He stopped but didn't turn around. "Tomorrow evening," Rita continued. 7 o'clock. There's a restaurant not far from downtown. They make great pasta. If you want, we can meet there." He turned around. His face lit up with such pure joy that Rita almost felt embarrassed. "Really? You're serious?" "I'm serious. But keep in mind it's just dinner. Nothing more." Of course, I understand. Thank you. See you tomorrow." He left so fast, like he was afraid she'd change her mind. Rita stood in the middle of reception holding the bouquet of white roses and smiling. The secretary watched her with curiosity. "Rita Richson, are you okay?" "Completely, Joanne. Completely fine. Dinner with Kurt turned out to be nice. He was an architect, loved old movies, and absolutely couldn't lie when he got nervous. The tips of his ears turned red. They talked for 3 hours, and Rita realized, with surprise, that she felt good. Just good, no strain, no drama, no hidden meaning. The kind of good you feel when you meet someone you can simply be yourself with. "You know," Kurt said when they left the restaurant and stopped on the corner, "when I read about you in the paper, I thought, here's someone who isn't afraid. Someone who does what she thinks is right, even when it's hard and scary. And I wanted to be like that." "I was afraid," Rita admitted honestly. "Every day. When I worked as a cleaner, I was afraid they'd expose me. When I testified in court, I was afraid no one would believe me. When I rebuilt the company, I was afraid everything would collapse. But I did it anyway. Because being afraid and doing nothing is worse than being afraid and doing it." He nodded. "May I kiss you?" She laughed. "Are you seriously asking for permission?" "Yes. I feel like you're the kind of woman you should ask." She looked at him at his reddened ears, his awkward smile, the hope shining in his eyes, and thought that Rose might have been right. A man wouldn't hurt. Especially one like this, honest, a little clumsy, but real. "You may," she said. A year later, on a similar spring evening, Rita stood on the balcony of her apartment, watching the sunset. Behind her, in the living room, Kurt was arguing with Emma about which cartoon to watch. Her niece had come to stay for the weekend. In the kitchen, Wyatt and Natalie were chopping salad, bickering over how much mayonnaise to add. Edgar sat in the corner with his laptop, pretending to work while actually showing something funny to Rose, who had been invited to the family dinner. It was all strange, noisy, unfamiliar, and absolutely right. Rita thought about the long road she had traveled. From a small town in Illinois, where her grandmother baked pies and told her fairy tales. Through Beijing, with its narrow streets and endless work. Through the pain of loss and the bitterness of loneliness. Through a mop and a Chinese contract, through courtrooms and victory, through fear and hope. To this balcony. To these people. To this life. She didn't know what would come next. Maybe the company would keep growing. Maybe Kurt would one day propose, and she would say yes. Maybe there would be children of her own, or maybe not. All of that lay ahead, unknown and tempting. But one thing she knew for sure, she was no longer alone. And that was what mattered most. "Rita." Kurt called from the room. "Emma says you promised her a princess cartoon. Is that true?" Rita smiled, looking at the last rays of sunlight gilding the rooftops. "It's true," she called back. "Turn it on, I'm coming." She took one more look at the sunset, breathed in the cool spring air, and went to her family. The mop was in the past. And the future was just beginning. 5 years later, the Bauinvest holding entered the top 5 construction companies in the country. Rita chaired the board of directors but had long since stopped working 14-hour days. She had learned to trust people and let go of control. Kurt never proposed. They both believed a stamp and a passport didn't change anything. They were together, and that was what mattered. Wyatt and his family moved to Chicago, opened their own design firm, and regularly received contracts from his sister's company. Emma started school and announced that when she grew up, she wanted to be like Aunt Rita, just without the mop. Rose retired, but every week she stopped by the office supposedly to check how the new cleaners were doing, but really to drink tea with Rita and catch up on the latest news. Edgar married again to that very Amber from accounting, the one Rita had once saved from signing fake documents. At the wedding, he gave a toast to honest people. "We have nothing to fear." Adler served his sentence and was released quiet, older, broken. Rita heard he moved somewhere to the provinces and no longer tried to do business. Bree never came to terms with her loss, but her attempts to harm Rita led nowhere. In the end, she simply grew old and tired of fighting. Her sons, the ones who were supposed to inherit the company, blew through their money in a few years and now lived on what was left. Sometimes Rita thought of them without gloating, without vindictive pleasure. Just stating a fact, life itself had put everything in its place. And Rita kept painting. Not professionally, of course, just for herself, on weekends at the country house. Watercolor landscapes, slightly crooked, a little naive, but alive. One painting showed the Bauinvest office, the same business center on Lakeshore Drive, but not gray and glassy like in real life. It was colorful, cheerful, with a rainbow over the roof. Another showed a little girl with braids holding the hand of a woman with tired, kind eyes. Her mother. That same photograph Rita had kept all those years now on canvas. "You're talented," Kurt once said, studying her paintings. "I'm an amateur," she objected. "I just paint what I feel." That's exactly what talent is. Feeling and not being afraid to show it. She looked at him, at his warm eyes, the smile lines on his face, the gray that had crept into his dark hair over the years, and thought that love could be different. It didn't have to be fiery and all-consuming like in youth. Sometimes it was quiet and steady, like a light in a window that stays on and waits for you to come home. And that, too, was happiness. One day, many years later, when Rita was already completely gray and long retired, a young journalist came to see her to write an article about the legendary woman with a mop. By then, the story had turned into an urban legend, overgrown with rumors and exaggerations, with barely half the truth left. "Tell me," the journalist asked, "how did you dare to do it? Weren't you afraid?" Rita smiled. Outside the window, snow was falling just like on that distant November day when she first walked into the business center with a bucket and a mop. "Afraid," she said. "Of course I was. But do you know what's truly terrifying? When you're humiliated, trampled, and you stay silent, endure it, because it's easier that way. Being afraid and not moving, that's what's really scary. Everything else can be survived." The journalist wrote down her words and asked more questions about business, about family, about plans. Rita answered, but her thoughts were far away. She thought of the little girl with braids who lost her mother at 8. Of the young woman surviving alone in a foreign country. Of the one who put on a blue work coat and picked up a mop to learn the truth. All of them were her. The same person. And everything she had lived through had led her here, to this quiet evening, to the snow outside the window, to this life that turned out to be far richer and more surprising than she could have imagined. When the journalist left, Rita took an old photograph from the closet, the one with her mother. She ran her finger over the faded image. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Then she put the photo away, slipped on her coat, and stepped outside. Snow fell softly on her hair, her shoulders, on the city that had long since become her home. Rita walked along the snowy streets, smiling. Life went on. And it was beautiful. But let's go back to those very first days, when everything was just beginning. To the moment when Rita still didn't know how her gamble would end, and every step took real effort. The first morning in her role as a cleaner began with a small humiliation. Rita arrived at the office at 7 an hour before the workday started, as required for maintenance staff. In the supply room, where buckets, mops, and cleaning products were stored, she was met by a woman in her 60s with a tired face and worn hands. "New?" the woman asked, looking Rita up and down. "Pretty young for this kind of work." "Well, whatever. My name's Rose. I'll show you the ropes." She walked Rita through the floors, explaining where everything was, which offices had to be cleaned first and which only after everyone had left. "This one," Rose nodded at the door marked CEO, "you don't touch it all without special permission. Adler, he's like that, you know. Bossy. Doesn't like anyone poking into his business. Last month they fired a girl because she wiped dust off his desk while he was on the phone. Said she was eavesdropping." Rita nodded, memorizing everything. Every detail mattered. "And what are the people like here?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. "The people?" Rose sighed. "All kinds. Some are decent, say hello, say thank you. And some, well, you'll see. Management mostly talks down to us. They see us as furniture. The main thing is don't catch their eye too often and keep quiet, you will be safer that way." The first incident happened before lunch. Rita was mopping the floor in the third-floor hallway when a group of young men in expensive suits walked by. Judging by their badges, sales managers. One of them, a red-haired guy with a smug grin, stepped right onto the freshly cleaned section without even looking, leaving a dirty shoe print. "Oh," he said without turning around, "guess it's wet here." His friend snickered. Rita silently took a rag and wiped away the mark. Anger boiled inside her, but she reminded herself it was just a roll. Temporary. Soon everything would change. "Hey," the redhead finally turned around, "you're not bad looking. Cute, actually. Want to take a walk after work?" "Thanks, I'm busy," Rita replied without lifting her eyes. "Oh, come on, don't play hard to get. What's a cleaner got to do after work anyway? Mop floors at home?" More laughter. Rita straightened and looked him in the eyes calmly, without challenge, but in a way that made the smile slowly slide off his face. "I need to work," she said. "If you don't mind, please walk on the dry area. On the left." Something in her tone made him step back. He snorted, muttered something like "thinks too much of herself," and led his friends toward the elevator. Rita watched him go and made a mental note, "sales department." Look into what's going on there. That same evening, she overheard two secretaries talking in the smoking area. They didn't notice Rita washing a window in the adjacent room and chatted freely. "Did you hear Corey got another bonus?" one said, taking a drag. "Supposedly for exceeding targets. And everyone knows he just makes the numbers up." Of course everyone knows. But who's going to say anything? Adler covers for him. They're related or something, third cousins or whatever. Yeah, that's why Corey acts like he owns the place. Knows nothing will happen to him. Rita remembered the name. Corey from sales. Probably the same redhead. Adler's relative. Faking numbers. That could be useful. On the second day, she met Amber, the very accountant she would later save from signing fake documents. But back then, neither of them knew their paths would cross that way. Rita was cleaning the hallway near accounting when a young woman came out of an office with tear-streaked eyes. She wiped her face with a handkerchief in a hurry and was moving so fast she didn't notice the bucket of water, ran straight into it, knocked it over, and soaked herself up to the knees. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she cried. "I didn't see it, please forgive me." Rita lifted the bucket, grabbed a dry cloth, and handed it to her. "It's okay. Dry off, or you'll catch a cold." The woman took the cloth, but instead of drying herself, she suddenly burst into tears, bitter, choking sobs, like a child. Hey, Rita panicked. "What happened? Are you okay?" No, it's nothing," the woman shook her head, trying to pull herself together. "It's just work. I can't. I'm sorry." She dropped the cloth and ran toward the elevator. Rita watched her go and thought that something was very wrong in this company. People were afraid. People were crying. People were breaking down. And management pretended everything was fine or worse, deliberately created this atmosphere of fear. That evening, she called Reed and told him what she had seen. "It's bad here," she said. "Much worse than I thought. People are intimidated. Management acts like feudal lords. And I'm sure financial violations are just the tip of the iceberg." "Are you sure you want to continue?" the lawyer asked. "This could be dangerous." "I'm sure. I need more information. Is there any way to get access to internal documents?" "Only if someone on the inside helps you." "Do you have anyone in mind?" Rita thought of Rose, but no, the elderly cleaner probably had no access to anything serious. Of the crying accountant, but she was clearly on the edge of a breakdown. "Anyone else?" "Not yet," she admitted. "But I'll find someone." The third day brought unexpected luck. Rita was cleaning the break room, a small space with a couch, a coffee machine, and a couple of tables where employees came to grab a snack. The door opened, and a middle-aged man with a kind face walked in. She recognized him immediately. It was Edgar from IT, the one who had asked about tea. "Oh, hi," he said cheerfully. "You're the one who told me about the tea, right? Thanks again, I have breakfast here every day now." "You're welcome," Rita smiled. "I'm glad it helped." Edgar poured himself some tea, pulled a sandwich from a bag, and sat down at a table. Then he looked at Rita, who was still wiping the windowsill, and suddenly said, "You know, I've worked in different companies for 12 years. And I can tell you this for sure, you can judge a company by how it treats its cleaners." "Seriously?" Rita stopped, interested. "Absolutely. If management is rude to technical staff, it means they're rude to anyone weaker. If they don't notice them at all, it means they don't see people, period. And if they respect them, well, sadly, that's rare." "And here?" Rita asked. Edgar gave a sad half-smile. "Here, like everywhere else. Meaning bad. Adler's a tyrant, his deputies are yes-men, and everyone else just survives. I've been here 8 years. Seen it all. But I can't leave mortgage." "That's sad," Rita said. "What's sad about it?" Edgar shrugged. "That's life. The important thing is to keep something human inside yourself. That's what I try to do, say hello to everyone, thank the cleaners, let people go first in the elevator. Small things, but they matter. And I respect myself for it." Rita looked at him and thought, this was the person she needed. Honest, unhappy with the situation, but not someone who had lost his conscience. Someone like that could be convinced to help. She just needed to find the right approach. On the fourth day, she began to act. She deliberately came to the break room at the same time as Edgar, and just as she expected, he was there. This time they talked for almost an hour. Edgar told her about his family, his wife, Anna, who worked as a schoolteacher, their 2 children, a teenage son and a daughter in elementary school. He talked about his dream of someday starting his own business, a small IT company where everything would be humane and fair. About how tired he was of corporate intrigue and rudeness. "And you?" he suddenly asked. "How did you even end up here? You're clearly not." "Well, you know." Rita tensed. "What do you mean?" "Well, you're educated. You can hear it in the way you speak, in your manners. Why are you working as a cleaner?" She paused, choosing her words. Then she told the partial truth. "I needed a job quickly. Without paperwork, without references. This was the only thing I could find." "I see," Edgar nodded. "That happens. Well, hang in there. If you need anything, let me know. I'll help however I can." At that moment, Rita realized she had found her person. Over the next 2 days, she carefully tested the ground. She told Edgar she was curious about what was going on in the company, just out of interest. He willingly shared gossip, never suspecting that his listener was more than just a curious cleaner. Gradually, a picture emerged. Adler and his inner circle, the CFO McLean, the head of sales Corey, the same redhead, and the company's chief lawyer Hutchins formed a kind of closed group. They made all the key decisions, controlled financial flows, and systematically drained money from the company through shell contracts and inflated purchases. The rest of the employees either didn't know or knew but kept silent, afraid of losing their jobs. "The worst part," Edgar said, warming his hands on a cup of tea, "is that this company could be great. The technology is there, the specialists are there, the clients are there. But this management, they're like a cancer. They just keep feeding, and the body is dying. And if someone tried to change it?" Rita asked carefully. Edgar gave a bitter smile. "Who? How?" "Adler is the CEO. He has all the authority. The board of directors is his people. The shareholders." He stopped himself. "Well, there was one shareholder, Richson, who could have done something. But he died a month ago. And his heirs? God knows who they are. Probably just like him." "Was Richson a bad man?" Rita asked, keeping her voice steady. "I don't know," Edgar shrugged. "I never met him personally. They say he was sick in his last years and rarely showed up. Adler ran the company, and Richson just collected the money. But who knows, maybe he didn't even realize what was happening here." Rita said nothing. She knew her father had realized he told her himself before he died. He just didn't have time to act. On the 6th day, something happened that sped everything up. Rita was cleaning the CEO's reception area. Adler was away at a meeting, and the secretary, Joanne, had allowed her in. On the secretary's desk, among papers and folders, lay the visitor log. Rita casually flipped a few pages and saw an entry that made her freeze. Zhang Wei, delegation of Huashan Company, negotiations on the Orient contract. Date, the day after tomorrow. The Chinese delegation was coming to sign that very contract. She had less than 2 days left to figure everything out and make a decision. That evening, she called Reed. "I need the ownership documents. Urgently. The Chinese partners are arriving the day after tomorrow, and I have to appear before Adler signs the contract with them." "Understood. The documents will be ready by tomorrow evening." "Are you sure you're ready?" "I am. And one more thing, I'll need help from Dwayne, the head of security you mentioned. He's been informed. He'll be waiting for your signal." The 7th morning, the decisive one, began like any other. Rita came to work, changed in the supply room, grabbed her bucket and mop. Rose, as always, grumbled about the weather and how young people didn't want to work anymore. "You're strange today," she said, studying Rita. "Your eyes are shining. Fall in love or something?" "Maybe," Rita smiled. "Rose, what time are you working until today?" "Until 1. "Why?" "Stay a bit longer if you can. By lunchtime, things will be Interesting. The old woman looked at her suspiciously but said nothing. At 9 o'clock, Rita went up to the 6th floor and took her position in the hallway outside Adler's office. She knew he would arrive around 10. He had a meeting scheduled with the lawyer Hutchins about the next day's negotiations. At 9:30, Dwayne appeared, a tall, gray-haired man with a military bearing. He walked past Rita, barely nodding, and went up one floor. Security was ready. At 9:45, Reed arrived. Rita saw him through the window getting out of his car with a briefcase. The documents were in place. At 9:50, Adler appeared in the hallway, red-faced, irritated, as always. McLean scurried behind him, explaining something in a rush. They passed Rita without even looking at her and disappeared into the office. At 9:55, the secretary Joanne came out of the office and hurried off somewhere with papers. The hallway was empty. Rita took a deep breath and walked toward the office door. This was the moment of truth. What happened next, you already know: the mop, the contract, the translation errors. Take off your badge. But behind those few minutes were days of observation, dozens of conversations, hundreds of small details that came together into one clear picture. Rita didn't just expose Adler, she did it in a way that left him nothing to argue with. She had evidence. She had allies. She had the truth. After security took Adler and McLean away and Reed took over the legal formalities, Rita remained in the hallway. Employees stood around her, unsure how to react to what had just happened. Rose was the first to come to her senses. She squeezed through the crowd, walked up to Rita, and silently hugged her tight, motherly. "I knew it," she whispered. "Knew you weren't simple. Just didn't think it was on this scale." Rita hugged her back, feeling tears well up in her eyes. It was strange, she hadn't cried in years, and now suddenly. "Thank you," she said. "For everything. For telling me about this company. For treating me like a human being." "Oh, come on," Rose pulled back and wiped her eyes. "I was just running my mouth. You're the one. You did great. You're the real deal." Then Amber approached the accountant Rita had saved from signing fake documents. She still looked shaken, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes. "Rita Richson," she said quietly, "thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you. I probably would have signed it and then punished myself for the rest of my life." "Don't thank me," Rita shook her head. "You're not to blame. You were put in an impossible situation. They're the ones at fault, the ones who created a system like this." She looked around at the crowd. Dozens of faces, frightened, distrustful, hopeful. Her employees. Her company. Her responsibility. "I know the last few years have been hard," she said loudly, so everyone could hear. "I know many of you were afraid, endured it, stayed silent. That's over. Starting today, things will be different here. I won't promise it'll be easy, there's a lot of work ahead. But I do promise it will be honest. And fair. And if any of you want to help me rebuild this company, I'll be grateful." The first weeks after the upheaval, there was no other word for it, were the hardest. Rita worked without a single day off, clearing out the mess the previous leadership had left behind. A full financial audit had to be done, bad contracts had to be terminated, Adler's inner circle people had to be fired, and replacements had to be found. Accounting was the worst. The chaos there was so deep that even experienced auditors threw up their hands. "This isn't accounting," one of them said. "It's archaeology. You don't calculate here, you dig." But gradually, layer by layer, the picture became clearer. Over the last 3 years, more than $200 million had been drained out of the company through shell firms, inflated purchasing, and fake consulting fees. The money ended up in offshore accounts, some belonging to Adler personally, some to his partners. "We can try to get it back," Reed said after reviewing the documents. "Not all of it, but a significant part. It'll take time and very good lawyers, but we have a chance." Rita nodded. She had no illusions money returned slowly, and not always. But the fact that the criminals would be punished, and that at least some of what was stolen might come back, warmed something inside her. While she was untangling the financial mess, Rita also restructured the company. First, she replaced every manager connected to Adler. New people came in, some from outside, some promoted from within the rank and file. Edgar became IT director and immediately started modernizing systems that hadn't been updated in years. Amber was promoted to deputy chief accountant, with a plan for her to lead the department within a year. Even Rose got a promotion head of facilities, with a small raise and her own office. "What do I need an office for?" Rose grumbled, though it was obvious she was pleased. "I'm no boss. I've been mopping floors my whole life." "You know this company better than anyone," Rita replied. "And you know what human looks like. I need people like you." Corey was a separate problem, the red-haired nephew from sales. As soon as he found out his uncle had been arrested, he rushed to Rita with apologies and dramatic promises of loyalty. "I didn't know anything," he swore. "I swear I didn't. I thought my uncle was an honest man. I'm ready to work." To prove that Rita listened in silence. Then she said, "Corey, I've seen the reports you submitted. The numbers don't match. The clients you claim you brought in don't exist. That's fraud." He went pale. I can explain." "No need. You're fired. And be glad I'm not taking you to court. I have more important things to deal with." Corey bolted out, slamming the door. Rita wasn't sure if she had been fair with him. But it didn't matter. What mattered was this: the people who stayed saw that the new owner didn't just talk about honesty. She acted. A month after the upheaval, what employees had started calling that day, Rita held the first all-hands meeting. She rented a large hall in the business center, gathered everyone from top managers to cleaners, and gave a speech. "I want to tell you about my plans," she began. "And about what I want this company to look like in a year, in 5 years, in 10. She spoke about growth, new projects, investments in technology and in people. About building not just a profitable business, but a place where people actually want to work. Where they are respected, valued, heard. I know many of you don't believe me," she said at the end. "You think these are just pretty words new management says until they settle in, and then everything goes back to how it was. I won't try to convince you with words. I'll do the work, and you can watch. And if in a year you see I lied to you, you can tell me to my face. I'll listen." The hall went quiet. Then someone started clapping softly, uncertainly. Another person joined. And suddenly the whole room erupted into applause. Rita stood on the stage, looking at those faces, still cautious, but with a flicker of hope now, and understood that this was only the beginning. There was a lot of work ahead. But she would handle it. A separate chapter of that year was the war with Bree. Her father's widow had no intention of backing down. She filed a lawsuit challenging the will, hired private investigators, and launched a media campaign. "Fraudster seizes dead husband's company," screamed tabloid headlines. "Con artist pretended to be a cleaner to gain trust." Rita ignored the papers, but rumors spread anyway. One day Amber approached her, pale, lips trembling. "Rita, they're writing such things online." She hesitated. "That you took the cleaner job on purpose to spy on people. That you collected dirt to blackmail everyone." I know what they're writing," Rita interrupted gently. "And I know who's behind it. Don't pay attention." "But how can you? How can you just let it go?" Rita smiled. "Amber, there are things you have to respond to, and things you shouldn't. If I start explaining myself to every troll online, I won't have time to work. And work is the best answer to any lie. When the company thrives, when employees are happy, when partners line up to work with us, that's when everyone will see who was right." Amber nodded, though it was clear she wasn't fully convinced. Rita herself doubted sometimes, was she being too passive? Should she fight back publicly? But then she remembered her grandmother's saying from childhood, "The dog barks, but the caravan moves on." And she kept working. The court hearing on the will took place in February, 3 months after her father's death. Bree arrived dressed in black, wearing a tragic expression, surrounded by lawyers and journalists. Her sons, Paul and Oliver, sat beside her, gloomy and silent. Rita came with only Reed as her representative. "This case has no real chance," the lawyer told her the day before. "The will is flawless, notarized by 3 notaries, and there's video of the signing. All they can do is drag it out and try to rattle you." That's exactly what happened. Bree's lawyers tried to prove Joseph was mentally unfit when he signed, failed. Tried to paint Rita as a con artist manipulating a dying old man, failed. Tried to dispute paternity, a DNA test confirmed it beyond any doubt. In the end, the judge ruled the will was valid, the claim was dismissed. Bree walked out of the courtroom white as chalk. She stopped in front of Rita, and they stared at each other for several long seconds. "You think you've won," the widow hissed. "But this isn't over." "For you, maybe," Rita replied. "For me, it was never a war. I simply received what my father left me, and I'm trying to handle it with dignity. If you want to keep fighting, that's your right. But I won't be your enemy." She turned and walked away without looking back. Behind her came camera clicks and shouted questions from reporters, but she didn't pay attention. The important thing was done. The legal question was closed. Now she could focus on the work. Spring brought new worries and new joys. The company was slowly coming out of the crisis. The Chinese partners, with whom the contract had almost fallen apart, became regular clients. Adler and his accomplices were awaiting trial and pretrial detention. Employees began smiling in the hallways, not forced, not out of fear, but simply because it felt good to work again. "You know what Jemima from marketing told me today?" Edgar asked. That for the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel like pretending to be sick in the morning just to avoid coming to work. "Can you imagine?" Rita smiled. "That's a good sign. It means we're on the right track." "Absolutely." Edgar dropped into the chair across from her. "You changed everything. Not just the management, but the atmosphere itself. People started talking to each other, discussing ideas, arguing in meetings. Before, that was impossible. Everyone was scared. And now it's still not perfect," Rita interrupted. "Of course it's not perfect. Nothing ever is. But it's better. Much better." They fell silent. Outside the window, the sun was setting, flooding the office with golden light. "Edgar," Rita said suddenly, "thank you for helping me back then, at the very beginning. You risked everything, your job, your reputation, your family's peace. And you didn't even know who I was. You just believed me." Edgar grew embarrassed. "Oh, come on. It's nothing. I just saw that you're a decent person. Someone who wants to do the right thing. And decent people should be helped. Otherwise, what's the point?" The summer was hot in every sense. Adler's trial began, and Rita spent a lot of time in the courtroom, giving testimony. It was exhausting going over the same questions again and again, listening to insinuations from the defense lawyers, looking into the eyes of the man who had shoved her with a mop a year earlier. But she held on. "Do you understand that your actions, your infiltration into the company could be seen as provocation?" the lawyer asked. "I worked in my own company," she replied once again. "Legally. Without violating anyone's rights. Your client, on the other hand, violated my rights when he hit me with a mop in front of witnesses." The lawyer grimaced, but there was nothing to argue with. There were plenty of witnesses. Dozens of employees had seen that scene and were ready to confirm Rita's testimony. Between court sessions, she worked reading documents, holding video meetings, signing contracts. Life didn't stop for the trial, and the business still demanded attention. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Wyatt told her one day. They were sitting in a cafe near the courthouse, where Rita had stopped for a quick bite between hearings. Her brother had come to support her. He did that often now, and their relationship was growing warmer. "I'm fine," Rita waved it off. "You're not fine. You have dark circles under your eyes, you've lost at least 10 pounds, and I'm sure you sleep about 4 hours a night." 5. "Oh, excuse me. A whole 5 hours. Then everything's perfect." Rita couldn't help but smile. "Wyatt, I appreciate your concern. Really. But I need to finish this. Then I'll rest. There will always be something else. And you'll say the same thing again. And again. Until you collapse." "I won't collapse. I'm strong." "I know. But even strong people break if they push themselves too long." He covered her hand with his. "Promise me after the verdict, you'll take a vacation. At least a week. Come to Boston, spend time with Emma, drink tea on the porch. Rest." Rita looked at him at his worried face, his warm eyes, and felt something inside her soften. A brother she hadn't known a year ago. A family she'd never had. "I promise," she said. The verdict was delivered in August. Adler received 6 years, McLean 4 years suspended. When Rita walked out of the courthouse, she was met by a crowd of journalists larger than the first time. She said a few words about justice and left without answering questions. In the car on the way home, she leaned back in the seat and closed her eyes. That was it. Almost a year of struggle, stress, and uncertainty, and now. What? She had expected to feel triumph. Relief. At least satisfaction. But inside there was only emptiness. "Rita Richson," said Dwayne, who was driving. "Are you okay?" "Yes. Just tired. Should I take you home?" She thought for a moment. "No. To the country house. I want to be alone." The country house greeted her with silence and the scent of pine needles. Rita wandered around the property, touching the rough tree trunks, listening to birds sing. Then she sat on the porch and simply watched the sun sink behind the forest. Her phone kept ringing. Journalists, partners, employees, read. She turned it off and slipped it into her pocket. Tomorrow. Everything tomorrow. Today only silence. That night, she dreamed of her mother, young, beautiful, just as Rita remembered her. Her mother sat beside her, stroked her hair like in childhood, and said something gentle that Rita couldn't quite make out. Then she vanished, and Rita woke up in tears. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how strange life was. About how everything could have turned out differently if her mother hadn't died, if her father had taken her with him, if... But if didn't matter. There was only reality, the one she had created herself. And that reality was not bad. In the morning, she turned her phone back on and found 132 missed calls. She sighed, poured herself some coffee, and started calling back. In the fall, she finally took the vacation she had promised Wyatt. 1 week in Boston turned into 2. It turned out you could learn how to rest, too. She walked around the city, played hide-and-seek with Emma, helped Natalie cook lunches. In the evenings, the 4 of them sat on the porch. Rita, Wyatt, Natalie, and Edgar, who had come for the weekend with his wife, and talked about everything and nothing. "It's strange," Rita said once, looking up at the starry sky. "A year ago, I was alone. Completely alone. And now you have us," Wyatt finished. "Family. Strange and unexpected, but real." "Yes. Real." She smiled and felt something warm spread through her chest. It was happiness, simple, quiet, but real. Winter brought new trials and new encounters. First, there was Lurin, the man from her past who appeared to ask for forgiveness. Then came the Christmas holidays in Boston, the first real family holidays of her life. And then, at the end of February, Kurt appeared. The very same stranger with roses who had seen her on TV and decided to invite her to dinner. Their first date was awkward and funny at the same time. Kurt was so nervous that he spilled his wine, scattered breadcrumbs all over the table, and forgot what he was talking about 3 times. Rita watched him and thought he was nothing like her usual type. She had always preferred confident, strong men. But something about his clumsiness was disarming. His sincerity. His genuineness. He wasn't trying to impress her, he was just being himself. "You know," he said at the end of the evening, as they stood outside and he desperately tried to flag down a cab, "I get that I'm probably not who you're looking for. You're successful, beautiful, smart. And I'm just a regular architect who can't even get a taxi to stop." He gave a crooked smile. "But if you ever feel like seeing each other again, I'd be happy." Rita looked at him, at his ears reddened by the cold, his awkward smile, the eyes with no trace of cunning or calculation, and suddenly realized she wanted to see him again. "Saturday," she said. 2 o'clock. "Show me some interesting building. You're an architect, you must know places like that." His face lit up as if she had given him the moon. "Yes, of course. I know one place. It has this early century Art Nouveau dash." He stopped himself. "I mean, if you're interested. Maybe you're not. Maybe you prefer something else." "Kurt." She put a hand on his shoulder. "Stop. I'm interested." See you Saturday. And she walked away, leaving him standing in the middle of the sidewalk with a blissful smile on his face. Their relationship developed slowly. Rita didn't know how to do it any other way. Years of loneliness had taught her caution, distrust of closeness. But Kurt was patient. He didn't push, didn't demand, didn't get offended when she canceled dates because of work. He was just there, reliable, warm, real. Why are you willing to wait so long? Rita asked him once. They were walking through a park, early summer already, the city drowning in green. Wait for what? For me. I can see it, you want more. You want us to be together for real. And I keep keeping my distance. Kurt was quiet for a moment. Because you're worth it. I don't want to rush you and ruin everything. You're the most amazing person I've ever met. If I need to wait a year, 2, 10, I'll wait. And if I'm never ready? He stopped and looked her in the eyes. Then I'll still be there. As a friend, as whatever you need. Because just being close to you is already happiness. Rita looked at him and felt something inside her, something that had been locked away for years, slowly begin to open. Idiot, she said softly. You're a terrible idiot. And she kissed him, right there in the middle of the park, under the surprised looks of passers-by. After that, everything moved faster. They started spending all their free time together. There wasn't much of it for Rita, but Kurt adjusted to her schedule. He came to the office with lunch when she forgot to eat. Sat nearby while she worked late, reading a book so as not to disturb her. Went with her to business dinners and patiently listened to conversations about construction that he didn't understand at all. I like him, Wyatt said after meeting Kurt. They had come to Chicago for the weekend, and Rita had arranged a family lunch at a restaurant. Solid guy. No ego. Too quiet, Natalie objected. I thought you'd end up with some kind of alpha male. You know, a company CEO, a millionaire. I've seen enough alpha males at work, Rita smirked. Enough for a lifetime. Kurt? He's real. I feel calm with him. That's what matters, Wyatt nodded. Feeling calm. A year later, they moved in together. Kurt moved into her apartment, and they started living as a couple. It was strange after so many years alone, getting used to someone else's presence, to someone waiting for you at home, to shared breakfasts and evening conversations. But gradually it became normal. A new, warm, right kind of normal. Are you happy? Kurt asked her once. They were sitting on the balcony, watching the sunset, and Rita was thinking about how strangely life worked. Yes, she answered. I think so. You think? I'm not very good at defining it. I haven't had much practice. He put his arm around her, and they sat in silence for a long time, watching the sky fade. Years passed. The company grew, becoming more and more successful. Rita gradually stepped away from day-to-day management, handing things over to people she trusted. Edgar became CEO, Amber took over the finance department. New employees came, some left, but the atmosphere stayed the same, the one Rita had created in those first months after the upheaval. An atmosphere of honesty and respect. One day, many years later, she walked into the break room on the third floor, the very one where she had once met Edgar. 2 young employees were sitting there, barely out of college, arguing about some work issue. When they saw Rita, they jumped up. Rita. Sorry, we were just sit, she waved them down. I'm just getting some tea. She walked over to the kettle, and one of the guys, the braver one, suddenly asked, Rita, is it true you used to work here as a cleaner? I mean, pretended to? Rita smiled. That story had long since turned into a legend, wrapped in rumors and exaggerations. It's true. For 1 week. To understand how things really worked here. And then, you exposed the director? Right in front of everyone? Something like that. The guys exchanged looks, half awe, half disbelief. That's awesome, the braver one said. You're amazing. Rita poured herself some tea and headed for the door. She stopped at the threshold and turned back. You know what the most important thing is, she said. Not being afraid. Doing what's right, even when you're scared. Even when everyone around you stays silent. Because one person can change a lot if they choose to. She left, letting them think about her words. In the final year of her career, before fully handing things over to her successors and retiring, Rita did something she had been thinking about for a long time. She founded a support fund for single mothers. She named it after her mother, the Margot Richardson Foundation. The foundation helped women in difficult situations, paid for housing, education, childcare. It gave second chances to those who had lost them. Why this? A journalist asked her at the foundation's presentation. Because my mother was a single mother, Rita replied. And she died when I was 8. I know what it's like to grow up without support. I want other children to have a different story. The final scene, the one that opened the ending of this story, took place many years later. Rita, now gray-haired, sat in her apartment giving an interview to a young journalist. Outside the window, snow was falling, just like on that distant day when it all began. If you could go back, the journalist asked, would you change anything? Rita thought for a moment. No, she said at last. Nothing. Every mistake, every pain, every challenge made me who I am. And led me to the people I love. So why change it? The journalist nodded, wrote it down, and asked the final question. What would you say to those who are in the same situation right now? Who feel small, powerless, invisible? Rita looked out the window at the snow, at the city, at life going on no matter what. You are not small, she said. You are not powerless. And you are not invisible. Every one of you matters. Every one of you can change your life and the lives of others. You just have to decide. Pick up that damn mop or whatever you have at hand and take the first step. And after that, it will move on its own. The journalist turned off the recorder and smiled. Thank you, Rita Richardson. That was inspiring. I'm glad if it helped. Rita walked her to the door and was alone again, but not for long. In half an hour, Kurt would come by with groceries, then Wyatt and his family for the weekend, then Edgar and his wife for dinner. The house would fill again with voices, laughter, life. The mop was in the past. And the future, it was here, just beyond that door, warm and real. And Rita stepped forward to meet it.